Too long didn't read defends us, but against what? Let's get into it. Welcome to the Five by the Fire podcast, brought to you by Freedom Story Media and the Unshackled Network. I'm your host, Pastor Fury, and I get the pleasure of being the executive director of the Unshackled Network. This family of missionaries that exist to help the marginalized experience freedom in Jesus through equipping spirit-empowered disciple makers called to the forgotten. You guys, we've been doing this podcast for 3 years now. In season 3 of this podcast, I'm just sharing random insights and exhortations from the Lord that He gives me, throughout the year. And I believe each and every one of these can bless someone. And hopefully that's you today. Now, if you're reading along with us, the McShane Bible reading plan is what we've been using to drive each and every episode. But this year, I'm just encouraging you to read these passages, okay? Numbers 25, Psalm 68, Isaiah 15, and 1 Peter 3. Now, have you ever tried to cram for a test by just reading the summary notes instead of the full textbook, right? Or maybe you watched a movie trailer and you felt like, I got the plot already. Maybe even you scrolled past a social media post that just seemed so long, right? You maybe glanced at the first few lines. If we're honest, we do this all more often than we'd like to admit, right? I mean, our culture has actually trained us to do this, to just seek convenience and instant gratification. We want the TLDR version of everything. Too long, didn't read, right? With books, articles, videos, you name it. There's nothing in culture that is exempt, and the things of God seem to be no exception either. It's easy to treat the Bible this way, right? We scroll past the long passages and we skim through, the narratives that we've read before, and we latch on to simple one-liners and these feel-good snippets. I read a blog recently by renowned marketing expert Seth Godin just last week, and it triggered something in me, you guys. I'm going to link to it in the description, as well as a brief video short I did about it where I even read through the entire post. Now, in this blog article titled The Defensive Arrogance of TLDR, he mentions that TLDR defends us and essentially protects us from changing. You guys, that's the core of what God's word does. It's sharper than a double-edged sword, and God calls us closer to Him through it. And He desires to use it to continually shape and mold us into the image of His Son, Jesus. Now, it's tempting to go for the spiritual milk, the bite-sized, easy-to-consume teachings that feel good in the moment, but don't really fill us up. Now, the writer of Hebrews warns us against living off spiritual milk alone. Now, normally I read from the ESV, but listen to Hebrews 5:13 through 14 in the Voice translation. It says this: anyone who lives on milk is still a baby and doesn't really understand the deeper truths about how to live right. But solid, nourishing food is for those who are further along in the journey, those who have trained themselves to experience the difference between right and wrong and then do what is right. I love the focus on applying God's word, right? Solid food, the truth of God's word, it requires work. It takes effort to chew solid food, right? To break it down in digestible pieces that can be fully absorbed and metabolized. Skipping straight to the Spark Notes version of things, it might seem satisfying in the moment, but it can't truly nourish us. It's like we want something to chew the meat for us, to metabolize it and then give us just a taste, or even purify the meat so we can simply drink it like a smoothie. I know it's a disgusting visual, right? But is that not what TLDR summaries and trailers do for us? I mean, think about training for like the Ironman competition. You can't just read a quick summary of how to do it. The real growth, the real transformation happens along the journey, mile after grinding mile on that road or in the water, pushing through cramps, fatigues, and doubts. But then you get to experience the pure elation, the joy the satisfaction of crossing the finish line after the hard journey. Or so I've heard. I mean, I don't do fitness these days like I should. You guys, God's word is an inexhaustible feast just laid out for us. And we'll miss out on so much of it if we just skim the juicy stories, the wild imagery, the paradoxes that make us pause. Every verse, even the ones that we've heard 1,000 times, contain nourishing truth that is meant to sustain us. But we have to choose to dig in and chew. So let's not settle for the spiritual fast food anymore, all right? No more biblical Taco Bell. This week, pick a passage, maybe one from the readings that I mentioned earlier, maybe one that you've glossed over multiple times before. And today, decide to read it slowly. Wrestle with it. Soak it in. Put in the work to metabolize the solid food. That's where the pure sustenance is. So, hey, did this fireside chat bless you today? I want to encourage you, share it with a friend so you can pass this blessing along to them. All right. Once again, this podcast is brought to you by Freedom Story Media and the Unshackled Network. Freedom Story Media exists for small business owners and nonprofit leaders who either don't have the time, talent, or top dollar to create the compelling media needed to help grow their business or nonprofit. Now, if that's you, let Freedom Story Media help by creating quality videos and websites and graphics at affordable prices so that you can experience freedom in life and in your business. And hey, you guys, right now, I am Freedom Story Media, so I'd love to help you. I'd love to work with you. You can start your project today at freedomstorymedia.com. Or if you've enjoyed this podcast, check out other inspiring and fun content from the Freedom Story Podcast Network. You can do that at freedomstorymedia.com as well, or go to freedomstorypodcastnetwork.com. And hey, wherever you're at, subscribe. If you're watching this, subscribe below, or go to the Pastor Fury YouTube channel in the description if you're listening to this on the podcast, okay? Go to 5bythefire.org if you want the show notes for each and every episode, including the full devotional teachings for each day's chapters. But, you know, if you want these in the email, you can go ahead and go to unshacklednetwork.org/blog, and we'll send you those once a week. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to leave a rating wherever you're enjoying this. And, you know, if you're on Spotify or iTunes, go ahead and rate that. That helps other people find this. So having said all that, we'll see you back here next time, hopefully next week. Be blessed and be a blessing. Peace.